believe in hope. I believe in belief.
Hi, welcome to Coach Beard's Book Club. I'm Michaela, Coach Beard's assistant. Together with Andrea, Bex and Marita, we'll be diving into the books mentioned or seen in the Apple TV series Ted Lasso. So, if you love Ted Lasso as much as Richard loves supermodels, then join this group of 4 women, handpicked by Beard himself, and let's go! Welcome back, Greyhounds. I'm Michaela. I'm from Scotland, but I don't play the bagpipes.
And I'm Andrea from Chicago, and I've never been shot at.
I'm Bex. I'm from Brooklyn, and I am a Boston Red Sox fan.
And I'm Marita, and I am in Oregon, and it is not even raining here.
Awesome. Well, we're going to give you a quick summary, synopsis of The Beautiful and Damned by F. Scott Fitzgerald.
You did it. You said it without saying
I said
fuck.
it without saying fuck.
First published in 1922, The Beautiful and Damned followed Fitzgerald's impeccable debut, This Side of Paradise, thus securing his place in the tradition of great American novelists. We can agree to disagree on that. Embellished with the author's lyrical prose, here is the story of Harvard-educated, aspiring aesthete Anthony Patch and his beautiful wife, Gloria. As they await the inheritance of his grandfather's fortune, their reckless marriage sways under the influence of alcohol and avarice. A devastating look at the nouveau riche and the New York nightlife, as well as the ruinous effects of wild ambition, The Beautiful and Damned achieved stature as one of Fitzgerald's most accomplished novels. Its distinction as a classic endures to this day.
Does it though?
Listen, that's the Goodreads synopsis. So we're going with that just to get you all introduced to it if you have not read it and you just wanted a rough idea of what's going on. It really didn't tell us much, but...
Well, I also think before Michaela tees off, that's a golf joke, by the way, Scotland.
We invented it.
We should probably contextualize this within the Ted Lasso universe, right? So this is the book that when Ted is giving books to all the players as gifts, Jamie is the only player who doesn't get a young adult novel. He gets this book from Fitzgerald and immediately throws it in the trash.
Good call, Jamie.
And so while this might just be a one-off joke in Ted Lasso, where the joke isn't entirely in the title of the book, we're going to stretch it way out from there because a one-note joke is not much of a podcast, and see what we can find between The Beautiful and the Damned and Ted Lasso.
But it does give some insight to the idea that maybe Jamie was the brightest of them all by just throwing it away.
I think it's best to start by saying that I hated this book and everyone in it, and I gave up on reading it and went straight to audiobook. And after that didn't work, I went to Spark Notes. So if you're listening to this thinking, I can't be in a book club, one of the hosts of this did the Spark Notes. So you're absolutely fine. Honestly, though, I didn't need to read that much of it before I came to the conclusion that this is an incredible choice of a book for Jamie. And he had the right idea chucking it in the bin, in my opinion. And I would go as far to say is that if Jamie read this book, he'd have left the team and never came back, and I would not have blamed him. I'll give you the comparisons of Patch and Jamie that actually align. They're both self-absorbed. There's no two ways about that. They're both self-absorbed. They both isolate themselves as a form of self-protection, but I would say that Patch isolates himself more during his alcoholism. Before that, it tends to be a fear. Jamie is not, or has not, grown up in affluence. He is not averse to risk. When we see that he left Man City and went to Love Conquers All. He does not spend money that he hasn't earned himself. And yes, we could say that footballers are paid far too much money and that, it's ridiculous how much they actually have. But Jamie still earned that, right? It's his work that got him it. He's paid. Patch was just handed money. And when he wasn't anymore, he didn't know what the fuck to do. Whereas Jamie's money, he earned that. There's a big difference in that for me. This was meant to be a warning to Jamie. It was a really bad one, in my opinion. And I'm not going to lie, as a working class girl who grew up in a council estate, it made me really angry that Ted would choose this. And I do hope, as Marita says, that it was just a throwaway joke, because what Patch suffers from is affluenza. And it's just difficult to read about. You know what I mean? It's difficult to sympathise with him. He's thoroughly unlikable. Whereas with Jamie, although we know in the first one he's not good, he's a bit, he's a bully and he's nasty and stuff. It's not the same as Patch. For me, I didn't feel it was the same as Patch. I will acknowledge Patch seems to suffer from health anxiety. which would have been difficult for a man in that era. But he's also a narcissist, a misogynistic, lazy boy with very little to no redeemable qualities, in my opinion. This book should have been given to Rupert, right? Like, that makes so much more sense to me.
Yeah.
It just felt like this is Jamie in no way, shape, or form. To talk about the misogyny, though, I need to talk about these lines. Any girl who made a living directly on her prettiness interested him enormously. And we could apply that to Jamie, right? Because he did, I'm looking at your arse, babe, and she's like, fuck off. We could apply that to Jamie. I will give that. But the next line, the biography of every woman begins with the first kiss that counts. In the words of Roy Kent, Jesus fucking Christ, like, no, the biography of every woman begins. There's no way that I can even be taking that out of context, considering I didn't read the entirety of the book. It's just an awful fucking line, and you can kiss my arse for it. I would like to discuss where I think Jamie would actually be in a story like this, if he was, and then maybe you'll see why I'm so heated about this, because I'm calming myself down right now, but I hated this book. Jamie grew up on a council estate in North Manchester, and for our non-British listeners, a council estate is a social housing sort of area whereby you rent your house from the local council authority. It's lower than it would be if you were to privately rent, such like that, but your house is maintained, I'm doing air quotes for listeners, by the local council authority.
So in the US, I think the closest thing that we might have to something like that, it's not exactly the same, would be the projects.
The projects.
Yeah.
Or Section 8 housing in general, I think, even if it's not a big.
But if it's like more run down in the way you're referring to it, not actually being taken care of to the extent that it maybe should be.
I'll give you an example. We have council tax whether we rent or own our houses regardless, and we live in a council estate, but my mother-in-law lives in a sort of like middle class area in a neighbouring town, and in their salt bins they got salt, and in our salt bins we got little black pieces of grit. So that gives you an idea of like the sort of the thought that's put into looking after people in areas like that. They're not very well maintained. The police, in my opinion, use council estates as a quota filling area, persecuting people for petty crimes while ignoring the middle class areas, like unless to attend some knob end that's complaining about litter or some other trivial bullshit like that. In Scotland, we have free university, but in England, they don't. So there's very little opportunities around council estates, and we wonder why people turn to crime, right? Jamie is a scrapper. He's pulled himself up using his talent, a talent that he could have just been lazy and ignored, or he could have just kept as a hobby. A comparison of 1913 Patch to a 1913 Jamie would be incredibly different. For example, The Beautiful and Damned is full of laziness, drinking, gambling, and violence. And I've picked these specifically, and we'll come back to why in a second. But if Jamie was alive in 1913, it is very likely he would have been assigned to the workhouse, poorhouse, which were still actively open in 1913 and weren't shut till 1930. In my opinion, workhouses were disguised as care for the poor, but they weren't care for the poor. And to be honest, I don't think we can actually believe a lot of the stuff that's written about any positive sides of the workhouses, because to me, that's just propaganda. It's usual government bullshit. It was supposed to be there to help what they called idle paupers, which is basically a word for unemployed. But calling them idle paupers makes it sound like it's their fault they can't secure employment in the area that they're in. The workhouses, they would have these idle paupers or unemployed people who basically would go there to work. And it sounds lovely, right? Oh, if you can't get a job, come here, you can live here, you can work here, everything will be great. But we'll get on to why that's crap. Basically, they took advantage of the underprivileged and used them to benefit the people above. The people like Patch, really. Patch wouldn't last 5 minutes in a workhouse. This is from the National Trust. So local poor people, paupers who had nowhere else to turn, entered this building as a last resort, cut off from the community outside. Over 150 inmates, and they were called inmates, which should tell you enough, could be housed at any time, managed by a paid master and matron. So even within the confines of the workhouse, there is somebody getting paid, there's somebody above you sort of thing. Their lives were severely restricted and regimented. The idle and profligate, another name for unemployed, were occupied with dull tasks such as breaking stones for roads and pulling rope apart. Aspects such as education, medical care, or diet may actually have been better inside the workhouse than for the poor in their own homes. Yeah, not sure. Probably true, but it doesn't make it good, right? It just makes you think, well, why weren't why were the work conditions outside so bad? Able-bodied people were made to work, so breaking up the stones and pulling the ropes apart. There is literature that will tell you that they accepted disabled people and saw them as being deserving of the care and didn't. Yeah, not so sure about that, to be completely honest with you. Considering how we treat disabled people nowadays, I really don't see them, doing that. But that's what I mean about not being able to believe any of the good things that we read about it. The daily routine restricted inmates to 2 or 3 rooms, so an exercise yard and their workrooms and basically where they slept. But they slept in dormitory type situations. There was no privacy. They did a lot of manual labour. Jobs included cleaning and maintaining the building, preparing food, washing, and other arduous tasks such as breaking stones or turning a mill. A range of buildings at the rear provided a laundry, infirmary, and cowhouse. Life was very regimented, controlled, and monotonous, and all inmates wore uniforms. Not that far off a prison. They rarely received visitors and could not leave unless they were formally discharged to find or take up work and provide for themselves. So really, once you signed yourself up for this, there was really no way out. They can say that you could have just walked out and left whenever you wanted. Workhouse discipline. Now, this is getting back to the laziness, the drinking, the gambling, and the violence, all of which the punishment in workhouses was anything from being hit with a rod and deprived of your already minimal rations, which was usually just gruel, which is like a type of porridge or crap oatmeal. And so the rations to being incarcerated in prisons and made to work even harder labour than in the workhouses. This included children,
Like Oliver Twist.
Yeah, yeah, essentially. You know what I mean? Like it included, there was no, that's a child, let's not beat them with a rod. There was no exclusions from that. And it's not like he could go and get a cuddle from his family, because the workhouse parents only got to see their children for a small amount of time, if we can believe they actually got to see them at all. I also believe, furthermore, it's likely that in this environment, Jamie's dad would have been even more abusive. It would have been horrific. And this was all going on at exactly the same time as Patch spent whining about not wanting a career and all this sort of stuff. So I think that's why it's incredibly hard for me to sympathise in any way with Patch, even though there are aspects where he does deserve the sympathy. For me, it's like this was all actually going on to the benefit of him and everybody else that has loads of money, because they then don't have to go out and do all this work. They just get people to do it for essentially free. These people didn't get the luxury to say, oh, I'm scared of going and doing a monotonous career, and I'm scared of not doing what I actually want to do. They didn't get that luxury or privilege. They had to get up at ridiculous o'clock in the morning and work till ridiculous o'clock at night and have very little downtime. And even when they did have the downtime, it wasn't till the late 1920s, I think, before they gave people in workhouses luxuries like books or other things that they could occupy their downtime with. I think what I'd like to say to Ted is that, yeah, I'm angry at Ted for giving him this book. And I'd like to say to him that nuances matter, Ted, because while I think Jamie is, in the first season, in the first couple of episodes, a self-absorbed arsehole, I agree with that. Him and Patch cannot be put in the same category in any way, shape, or form. There is nothing in this book, in my opinion, that Jamie could have learned. One, because he was so self-absorbed, he wouldn't get it. He wouldn't get the sort of message he was supposed to get anyway, which I assume is, don't be so self-absorbed because you'll end up destitute or you'll end up struggling. It wasn't enough for me. The fact that the nuances weren't really addressed mean that I think Jamie was right and he should have chucked this book in the bin, and I'm glad he did. And that was incredibly short because I didn't read the entire book.
No, but I think you brought up a lot of great points, and I appreciate the history, because you're right. Like, if you put Jamie back in that time period, then he would have been able to survive way better than Anthony Patch does, simply because of the experiences that he had to endure himself growing up, and that he was coming from a place of hardship instead of falling to a place of hardship.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think he probably would have ended up in a workhouse when he was a child, because if his dad was abusive, we don't know about his mum, he probably would have got in trouble. And then even petty things such as stealing a loaf of bread or swearing at a police officer would have landed him in the workhouse. And we know Jamie would have done that, right? We know he would have, been a little troublemaker.
I do think it's interesting how much backgrounds have a an effect on how we interacted with this book, because I take it from more of a distance. And, I came from a working class background, but I lived in Cambridge for 10 years, right? So the Massachusetts, not the England one, right? So I kind of immunized against rich Harvard idiots. I mean,
Right.
and I have to be careful with that because I know so many lovely people from Harvard, but I absolutely know people who are the current version of Anthony Patch as well. And I'm in a position now where I can just sort of laugh at them, but I can understand how I would respond to this book differently if I hadn't been in that world for so long.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah, and I also and I kind of talk about it in my section, but just like I also have I believe all books deserve a place, even though, right, like I read this, I had a very like I read the whole book, but I will admit there were times I was just like like
Yeah.
like I'm just like there were just too many words. I don't want to get too much into my own, but I just wanted to say, like, there is also a part of me that I think maybe what Marita's kind of saying, like, I can also kind of take this step back and just be like, okay, this book was written in a different time. It's not excusing it. It's not saying like, oh, everything he says in here is fine. This is like, everything's fine. That's not what I'm saying. But I can also say, okay, this was written in a different time. There are some redeeming qualities, and
I definitely have a bias, as well.
Like there are a few redeeming qualities. And so like, I can see like, okay, like, there's something here and there's something to be looked at. Like I'll defend to the death the right of a book to exist. Right. Like I'm not here about banning books and like, even, whatever, like I'm not going to recommend this to people to read. Right. But I'm not banning anything. I'm not going to say this book shouldn't be here because it's misogynist and it's, like, so that's kind of with the angle I took, but it is like, I agree with your opinion of the book completely.
I kind of lost my ability to critically think like that. And I'm kind of jealous because I agree with everything you're saying, but I just couldn't.
Yeah. No, that's valid. Yeah, and the perspective. Yeah.
But I do agree with everything that you're saying. And that's why I kept trying to say in my opinion, because there will be people who absolutely, this is their favorite book of all time, right? Fair enough. It's just that in my world, couldn't fit in at all. I really appreciate everyone's sort of taking that for what it was and not like totally hateful. But I think we're going to move to Bex, who might be slightly less angry than me.
Slightly, but I think my background is maybe slightly more aligned with yours in terms of my youth, and also being a child of a broken marriage and sort of like Jamie's experiences in that. I wanted to focus though less on Jamie and more on a theme that I see recurring in the book and also in the show. And so I want to start out where like maybe I'm a little less angry than Michaela was in her section, but there's going to be some dark content in here. So I'm going to throw out a couple trigger warnings to start for people who might be concerned about this, maybe skip ahead like 15 minutes or something. I'm going to talk about alcoholism. I talk about suicidal thoughts and suicide. And these topics are addressed in Ted Lasso. So if you've seen the show, I'm not going to get much deeper into them than we do in the show. So if it's something you think you might be able to listen, I encourage you to stick around. So I want to talk first about alcohol use in general and alcohol in literature and that sort of thing. Obviously, I say obviously, but I maybe it's not. Studies do show that alcohol negatively impacts emotional, mental, and the physical health of those who consume it. And the higher quantity that you consume, the more that it will impact these things, and generally in that negative light. No one's like, woo, I'm drinking all the booze and I'm getting like, you get happy for a bit and then you keep drinking and then you crash, right? Or, your physical health can degrade over time as well. And mental, which we absolutely see with Anthony Patch at the end of the book with his breakdown. Michaela, I know you didn't get to the end, but listen, I don't have anything good to say about the ending. It was just like, there's no lessons learned in this book. None.
The word is dissipated. He was dissipated. I love that. I love that term.
He had a breakdown. This is very much related to the alcohol that he consumed and the lifestyle around that alcohol as well. At least that's the way I read it. When we see alcohol in literature, it's a complex symbol. And I do say that literature counts TV. So that's where the Ted Lasso bit is coming in. Alcohol can serve to be three things, I think, in literature. The first one is it's a passport to the past. It allows you to reminisce about the times before and what was going on and what happened and oh, the good times, or oh, we've moved on from those bad times, whatever it is. It can be an escape from the present, something that you use to shut down and ignore the world that's happening around you in that moment. And it can also be a way to indulge in the potentials of the future, right? Daydreaming and like what could be. And we can really have alcohol affect past, present, and future. And we see that in both The Beautiful and Damned, and we see that in Ted Lasso, right? The use of alcohol. Well, I'll get into my examples in a little bit, but we have his turning to drinking after his father died. We have him drinking in the moment, and we have him thinking about what could be as well. And one of the bits I found when I was doing my research was that The Beautiful and the Damned is considered, quote, one of the most powerful studies of alcoholism in the literary canon. And I was like, yeah, that checks. That checks. I mean, there are others. There are absolutely others, but just the way in which it's done and the fact that it's done with someone of this higher class who, as readers who maybe don't relate to that experience, we're like, what do you have to complain about kind of mentality, right? Like I feel that way a lot of times when I'm reading books about wealthy people who are like, woe is me. And like, I get it. Like, there are things in their life that do affect them, but I struggle to have sympathy for that. And as I mentioned, Ted Lasso leaves room for us to study the use of alcohol, past, present, and future as well. Let's talk about some of the reasons that characters turn to alcohol, like what might be driving them to drink. This is a common theme in modernist literature, which is Fitzgerald's time period, which is also one of my least favorite time periods in literature, US or global. And trust me, I had to read like, I don't know, like 50. For my PhD, they made us read these reading lists, and they're like, okay, you can choose from like this old stuff, modernist stuff, 19th century that was like different from modernist, and contemporary. And I was like, get that modernist shit out of my face. I don't want anything to do with it. But for some people, that's a big thing. I just don't like the excessive wordiness, and like, just say what you need to say and move on. Like, I don't need 8 words to describe one thing. I don't know. That's just me. We don't see, at least I would say this in the US in particular. I'm not sure about television elsewhere, but it's not something that we see a lot of turning to in television unless it's a specific problem that a character is dealing with, right? Like, oh, this character is an alcoholic, or oh, this character is like 16 and underage drinking, and they've got to learn the ramifications of alcohol, right? We see it in that context.
It's the after school special approach.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But we rarely see it just sort of as a growing problem, and that's something I think is true in Ted Lasso. In The Beautiful and Damned, Fitzgerald refers to alcohol as a gay and delicate poison. And, like, oh, yay, it's happy, it's light, but it's a poison. It's gonna bring you down. And in Ted Lasso, we see the presence of alcohol and alcohol consumption sort of growing and being exposed to us as viewers more and more over the course of the first 2 seasons. Like, the alcohol is present throughout. I'm going to go through a couple examples in a minute about, where I think are sort of notable moments of alcohol, and not just like, hey, there's a pub and we're having a drink. No big deal for that. How I Met Your Mother, they spend a lot of time in a bar. Cheers. Like, but you don't deal with those same issues that I'm seeing here. With Anthony, why does he drink? Well, he wants to, like, I guess we would put it as restoring the excitement and the pleasure of being a kid, that childhood. Not that he's drinking as a child, but like to feel light and to feel that remembers that hits on the past and the reminiscing about what was good about childhood. And it hits the present escapism, right? It's fun.
I would also argue to some extent, since we're talking about a Prohibition era thing, at least part of the book is Prohibition era. Part of it is he drinks because he's privileged and he can.
Yeah.
Right?
And his grandfather is very anti-alcohol. He's a pro-prohibition.
Teetotaler. Yes.
Yeah.
There you go.
And so it is also a form of rebellion for him. And I had a quote that when I was listening to the audio book, as that's how I managed to get through it. I did make it through the audio book, although I probably zoned out on occasion. This quote, however, really stood out to me. But he hated to be sober. It made him conscious of the people around him. All that air of struggle, of greedy ambition, of hope more sordid than despair, of incessant passage up or down. And I'm like, but that's also you. It was still like that idea of using alcohol as a form to reminisce, to escape, and to daydream. And there's even a point where he says, here's to alcohol, the rose-colored glasses of life. And it's like, yeah, because that's what alcohol does for Anthony. It allows him to see things in a better light, to not be so negative in the moment. But when he comes crashing down, he feels even worse, which is why he reaches the point where he's just constantly drunk in this book. Like he's just like, oh yeah, have another one. And especially after his grandfather like disinherits him, he's like, well, what the fuck do I have to lose now anyway? I'm just going for it. So instead of like football is life, it's more like alcohol is life for Anthony. He even gets to the point, like I said, where he can't function without it. Then he goes beyond that, though, where he gets to the point where he can't function with it either. Right. So he sort of crosses that threshold and gets stuck on the other side. That's the way I understood it. He's like institutionalized at the end. Right. He's gone mad in essence. Like I just see him in like a wheelchair convalescing in this like little garden area. And they're like pushing him around in his wheelchair because he's just like lost all capacity. I don't know. Maybe I misread that, but like that's how I saw it.
I thought he was like on a cruise headed to Europe with Gloria, but maybe that was delusion. Maybe I just need to read.
He was
that
like,
last.
Whether he was on, he did do a cruise with her. Maybe. Oh yeah. I think he was on the cruise and not in the hospital. So he was totally gone.
But like, I thought the part at the end was, and because there are people talking about him and basically gossiping about how fucked up he is. And usually that's in a social environment, not in a, hopefully not a hospital environment.
You
but
know what? I think
could
you're
be,
right. I
could be
think
wrong.
you're right. I do remember something about them finally taking the cruise, but
because they were planning to go to Italy when they got the money. And sorry, I really didn't mean to be mansplaining there. I was just like,
no, I appreciate that because like I said, I prefaced mine with like, I don't know if I misunderstood the ending, but like so at the end they do get some money and they do go on this cruise, but at that point, like Anthony's far gone.
Fucked. He's absolutely fucked. That part is true.
It's really like, I imagine like one of those people that is just pushed around in the wheelchairs in the hospitals and stuff, or like in the gardens of the hospital, like, oh, let me take you out for your fresh air. It's like, let me put you on a boat for some fresh air, but like, you're just here so that I, Gloria, can enjoy this trip, So Ted and his alcohol consumption. One of the things that I think really pushes Ted to drink more, because we do see him drink very socially and casually in the early parts of the show, is that he thinks that he's failed, or at least that he gave up, right? Like, especially when it comes to his marriage with Michelle, right? He gave his wife some space, but that ended up in a divorce. And we do have her reassuring words. It's like, you're not giving up, you're letting me go. It's hard for him to wrap his head around that as someone who lost his father and doesn't necessarily know how to cope with that, right? I think he's afraid of becoming his father to a certain extent. He feels like his father abandoned him and his mother, but him in particular. Well, he didn't die. He did leave Henry behind, right? That's the way he sees it. It's less about Michelle and her space. It's more about him being separated from his son. And so it's different in that, Ted's father died and left him forever. But I do think there's a piece of Ted that worries that he's doing something similar to Henry. And I think this is weighing on him. So again, we're talking about the past, sort of reminiscing about what happened in his life in the past. Reminiscing does not have to be positive, and oftentimes is not, but also that present escape thinking about the fact that he's not with his son. We don't know for sure that his father is an alcoholic, but like there is mention of him spending every weekend in the bars, like with his father and throwing darts and everything. And it's like, was he throwing darts while his father was just sitting there getting drunk, or were they playing darts together? Like, we don't know any of this. But when I watch Ted's alcohol consumption evolve over the course of the show, it sort of pushes me in the direction of thinking there was some struggle there with alcohol. Ted says his father was hard on himself, and so maybe that was his coping mechanism. I don't know. And the part that really gets me in talking about the past and Ted's alcohol use in the past is when he discovered his father after his father died, took his own life. Ted immediately went to the refrigerator and cracked open a beer and drank it. And he was 16. Is that what that?
He said it was his first beer, didn't he? Or is that me just making that up in my head?
I'm not sure, but it was
Right.
definitely something that he like just went to. He's like, I need to cope with this grief. That's what I'm going to do. So it makes me wonder if like he saw that in his father as a way to cope with grief. We don't know his father's backstory.
Nuclear family idea, especially then in the early 90s, where Ted immediately is the man of the house now, and the man of the house copes with responsibility by coming home at the end of the day and having a beer, so he immediately takes on that role.
Mhm.
And so that could, I think, be in there too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as I mentioned, we see Ted's drinking increase over the course of the show. It is subtle, and that's to me what makes it different from the way we're used to seeing alcohol issues dealt with in television in the US, is that it's sort of a gradual buildup, but it is noticeable. It does become more than just social drinking. And I have a few examples. They're not necessarily in chronological order. They're just, I remember this and that. And it just came to mind. After Ted was supposed to talk with Roy, he shows up at the Crown and Anchor, and Beard has 4 beers.
Just a Freudian slip.
A little bit. Beard has these 4 beers lined up for Ted, thinking you're going to need these to cope with what you just dealt with. So I don't know if we want to say that Beard is enabling him because he might not have seen him go too far yet, but he's like, oh yeah, this is what he does to cope, and so I'm his buddy, and that's what I'll do to help him out. One I noticed in my rewatch of the Christmas episode today was that during the Secret Santa, and they're all like the Diamond Dogs plus are in the office, there's a point where Ted cheers to responsibility. I just found that ironic. Like, cheers to responsibility. Drink, drink, drink. I mean, not that you can't drink responsibly. Of course you can, but
while taking a half day on Christmas as well. It's like they're supposed to work all day, and he gave them all a half day. So responsible.
Well, and when Jamie came in needing a Secret Santa gift, I don't know if that's one Ted had just received, right? But I don't think so, because he had a whiskey with a little bow on it when he was at home, right? But he had that full bottle of Balvenie or whatever scotch it was all ready to go to wrap up for Jamie. Obviously, unopened, because otherwise that's a hell of a gift.
That'd be awkward. Later in that Christmas episode, we see Ted drinking that whiskey that you mentioned with the little bow on top at home. He's alone. He's just pouring whiskey neat or bourbon. What was it? What did you say it was?
I thought it was whiskey, but I'm not sure.
I don't know. Whiskey, bourbon. I don't remember.
Whiskey.
He was drinking some brown liquor and he was drinking it neat. And of course, in that scene is also he's watching It's a Wonderful Life. The main character in that movie is drunk in that moment and contemplating taking his own life. And so like these pieces are sort of being put together. After Ted gets his divorce papers, we also see him getting really drunk. And that's when he snaps at Nate. So there's a bit of anger that comes out that we're not used to seeing in Ted when he's drinking. And if you go back to the first season, when like the whole thing with Rupert and all of this, and he had been drinking beers, and he's like, what is it he asked for? He's like a whiskey,
a single
double.
and a double.
Yes.
Triple. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So he ends up with a triple whiskey when things don't really go the way he planned or the way he was thinking. So again, it's no big deal to drink some whiskey when you're at an event, but to have an issue of conflict occur and then immediately turn to give me this extra amount of alcohol, the pieces kind of start adding up to me, little by little. Like, you don't think much of that Charity scene in the first season because that's really the first time we're seeing him drink a little extra. And you're like, ha ha ha. Oh yeah, when I'm stressed or when things don't go my way, I'm like, oh, gotta have a drink. Like, oh, it's Friday, let's have a drink. Oh, finally the work day's over. I'm gonna go have a drink. and so you don't think of it in isolation like that, but once the pieces start building on each other, it starts to become more noticeable and makes you start questioning things. So I'm really curious to see what they do with alcohol in season 3, because I don't think it's going away.
Well, I thought it was interesting too, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when he goes up to Dr. Sharon's apartment, he notices, and you can see the eye line, he notices her empty bottles of wine there too.
Mm-hmm. Maybe the two of them will end up at AA together.
And he kind of judges her a little bit. Like, he kind of makes like a face, like, what do you do? And she's like, hey, Ted.
Yeah, yeah, I noticed that as well. And I thought, Ted, are you in a position to judge?
Yeah.
But he was just being curious, maybe.
Yeah, sure. The last little bit that I want to touch on is sort of the consequences and or the downfall of these characters. And I say the and or because we're not done with Ted Lasso. We haven't wrapped up, and we hope we get more of a sitcom-y ending where he doesn't have the consequences that Anthony Patch had. I started out with, what's wrong with Anthony drinking so much? Like, everyone around him drinks, and most of them drink too much too, right? They're always like the party where the grandfather shows up and is like, oh, you're all disowned. Like, they're all, what's the word they use? Tight. They're all tight. They were wasted, but in the parlance of the day, they were tight.
A little tight. Yeah.
Tight in Scotland means like tight with money. So
yeah, that's what it means here now too.
Is it? Right, because I was to say, but
yeah,
I mean both.
It's very antiquated language.
I just assumed it was a phrasing of the day. Like, people will say they got wasted, but that might not have been 100 years from now. People will be like, oh, wasted, what does that mean? It just means that it was no good and we threw it away. The problem with Anthony drinking so much, though, is that he is an alcoholic. He doesn't understand, like, his own perception is really warped. It's like he has no idea how far gone he is. He's just like, oh, I'm just having a little drink. I'm just having a little something. He doesn't recognize the problem. We really see this when we compare his public drinking to his private drinking. Socially drinking versus drinking on his own, right? In public, his drinking, his alcoholism, whatever we want to call it, comes off as social, right? He gets tight, but so does everyone else. In private, this is where the sort of alcoholism bit shines through, I think. He becomes someone who drinks to escape the emotional burdens of everyday life. Day after day, he drinks until he passes out just to avoid life and feelings and thinking about the future, right? We can drink to be like, oh, what great things the future could bring. But it's also like, what the hell are we going to do in the future? My life is shit. Like, I'm doomed. Drink. He even reaches the point where, at least as readers, we wonder if he's literally going to kill himself. And he does go mad at the end of the book. I mean, he's all but physically killed himself. His brain is just gone. He's shut down. That's how I understood it. He's just like, done. Return of Dot just did him in. But you know what, fool? You did that to yourself. You did that to yourself.
Look, the consequences of my own actions.
Here they are. Anthony Patch, we definitely see consequences and a literal, like, does Ted have a drinking problem then? I mean, let's talk about the past. Besides the beer that we already mentioned that he drank when he found his father, he told Rebecca at one point that he had a story that he wanted to tell about going to prom in his pajamas. We never get that story, but like, why would someone go to prom in pajamas? Like, oh, I'm just being funny. What pushed you over that point to like break the social norms to that extent that you would be willing to do that, right? Especially as a teenager. Not to say there aren't people who wouldn't do that sober, like, whatever. That's your thing. You just want to make a joke of it. But again, because that in itself, I wouldn't think twice. But when I put it together with all these other pieces, it makes me question it.
Well, that and that's not just the only social norm, because you should see what I wore to high school graduation, for example, and I was stone cold sober. However, I believe that story involves him going to jail, and that's that's a different boundary.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, we go back to his drinking after his dad died immediately, like without thought. That's the first thing he does is walk to the fridge and without thinking, crack open a beer. And even in the present,
Coors Light.
Yeah, gross. Well, I don't know. I'm a beer snob. Sorry, I have a problem with that. In the present, though, we see Ted try to use positivity. That is his like weapon of choice. That's his coping mechanism of choice. I'm just going to be super positive to the point of toxic positivity. But when that positivity angle doesn't work for him, what does he do? He drinks. I mean, that's what I've seen time and again when he tries to do the like happy-go-lucky approach and it doesn't work. He ends up drinking. So that leads me to my last question. Will Ted have his own downfall the way we saw with Anthony Patch? I mean, we're not there. We're not at the end. And I'm just going to throw it there. I sure as hell hope not. I sure as hell hope not. I don't want to see that for Ted. I'm here for a show that, while it deals with conflicts, is going to give me a bit of happily ever after. I don't need the realism of Anthony Patch's downfall.
It'll all work out, Bex. It'll all work out.
I believe.
I too believe.
Well, there's something interesting there too about like, and I know that poor people drink too, right? But there is something about privilege, right? And being able to like spend money to drown your sorrows. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like I said, I know that alcohol is accessible. Like alcohol's so accessible to everybody. Like, yeah, you can go and get a really cheap bud, right? Like, and get just as drunk as someone who can spend more. Mm-hmm. But
that's the same with loads of stuff.
Well, yeah, but I was just gonna say, like, it's just kind of the thing. Like, I think that, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy sorrow, right? Like, money doesn't solve everyone's problems, and rich people have things that happen to them too, but they have more ability to like throw money at it, mm-hmm. right? Like, they have this ability, you know what I mean? And like, there's just something there about like, I'm just going to go to this thing outside of myself. I can just pay some money, you know what I mean? And like drown my sorrows. I don't know.
I think beyond that, having the privilege of wealth affords more opportunities to be functional as an alcoholic, because you have more ways to cover up that you're not functioning properly. You don't drive a bus or operate heavy machinery for a living, right? Well, so
that kind of brings me to my, like, whether it's helping or hurting Ted, is that he has this support system. He has friends, he has family, he has therapy. Beard has given him alcohol, like I think Rebecca at one point suggests having a drink. Dr. Sharon has her own demons with alcohol, perhaps. Maybe she just had a party. Who knows? I don't think so, but it could happen. Are they helping him or are they hindering him? And I like to look at it as they are helping him. If any harm that they're causing is unintentional, he does have people who step in and help him, right? After he drinks those 4 beers, he almost steps out into the road and gets hit because he looks the way an American would look to see if traffic was coming. But Roy is
supposed to look both ways.
Yeah, well, details. Roy is there to stop him. Like, Roy helps him out. Rebecca is there to talk through him when he has some of these issues, to be a shoulder who understands the divorce and the pain that he's going through in that. He's got these close-knit relationships that I am hoping will like form their own little Diamond Dogs coalition and gather together to help Ted, right? If Anthony and even Gloria in the book had a strong support system, that would have helped them. There weren't those mechanisms in place in the late 1910s that we have in the present day.
I think it also presupposes their willingness to listen to anyone other than themselves. And I'm not sure I got that from the characters in the book.
And did they really have friends, did they? Or were they just people that were in the same position as them that they just hung about with?
I think there were a couple of them that would have actually been willing to help them at one point or another.
I mean, they help.
Isolated them.
They do help when like Gloria goes on her little freak out and wanders out into the train station. They do help search for her, for example. And it's not
And I was going to say, I cut you off, Andrea, and it sounded aggressive earlier, but what actually was agreeing with you was that when rich people do things that poor people do, they don't get the same stigma either. So, like, they might just call somebody who is rich and is suffering from alcoholism, he just likes a drink. But if that was a poor person, somebody did a great thread on Twitter once about all these things that are like, what is okay to do if you're rich but scummy, or like, I don't know what you would like say in America.
Oh no, that's completely true. You're right.
Yeah,
It's like when you're rich and you do something, it's like, oh, he's just, like, oh, he's just,
yeah,
whatever.
Eccentric.
Eccentric.
Yeah.
Well, we went to a really fancy hotel once in St Andrews, never again. Basically, around council estates, a lot of stigma would be smoking, wearing your jammies to drop the kids off at school, that sort of thing. And we were at this fancy hotel, and then like there was people up at like 8 a.m. or whatever, walking their dogs in their jammies in and around about the hotel smoking. I was like, do you know, and around where I come from, they would be saying all sorts about us for that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's not just, but also that could be a hindrance because they're not being a stigma,
right?
Might let them get away with.
Yeah, they don't take they don't take Anthony's alcoholism very seriously.
Yeah,
I feel like in Ted's environment, people will take notice faster if he starts to continue to spiral.
Yes.
And will be there to support him. So I am having like a slightly hopeful ending for Ted, even though the ending for Anthony was dismal. And I know that section had nothing to do with Jamie Tartt, but I don't think this book
doesn't need to.
Is Jamie's.
Going to just add on your last point, Bex, there is that as Ted's close friendships develop with people who aren't Beard, because, the limited amount we know about Beard's background, there's being paid to bite. There's his mom being full-blown QAnon, right? So you can imagine him being a product of a home where alcohol was a coping mechanism, and that's why he gives the 4 beers to Ted, right? Yes. Like why this is his way of nurturing. This is how you help people through, right? And so when Beard is Ted's only support, then that's a natural thing for him to turn to. But as his friendships grow outside of that, then maybe there's that help for that.
So, not an angry rant about the book as much as a concerned and kind of dark perspective.
So, Greyhounds, did you read The Beautiful and Damned? Do you agree with our takes? Let us know your thoughts at Beard's Book Club on Twitter. Email us at coachbeardsbookclub@gmail.com or leave a comment in the YouTube comment section. Please remember subscribe and leave us a great review.
But maybe we can lighten it up a little bit more. We'll take it up a little bit of a notch. I don't know, Andrea. What are you going to say?
Maybe just a little bit. And like, I actually want to pause for a moment and just pat all of our backs. Once again, like each of us, like I'm always amazed, regardless, we each kind of come with such unique and individual takes on everything. And I've learned already so much from both of your takes and like things that I wasn't even thinking about, right? Like we could not have planned this segue better. Because like what I titled my little section is entertainment, privilege, and what we value.
Ooh.
And so like this kind of conversation about privilege was just very
I'm looking forward to this.
Good segue. Mine goes on a couple different paths, but hopefully this will all make sense in the end. It makes sense in my head, so we'll see.
If mine did, yours will.
So I just want to kind of comment first about the book. Just I gave it 2 stars, one more than Bex. So yeah, we're inching up a little bit. I did not enjoy reading it. I also, like Michaela said, I disliked every single person. I thought there were too many words. I wasn't like excited to read it. It felt like I was like, okay, I'm going to read this book. But at the same time, I was highlighting stuff. And so I decided that I was hate highlighting.
I love it. That is the best ever.
Because there were these, and I think Marita was saying it first, and I agreed with her. Like, there are just these lines that are like, oh, that's such a great line. And so I actually have a few. And Marita, I know you said you had some quotes, but I just want to read a few that for me were just stood
There's
out
a whole
for me.
book there. Yeah.
Yeah. Things are sweeter when they're lost. I know because once I wanted something and I got it, It was the only thing I ever wanted badly, Dot. And when I got it, it turned to dust in my hand. And that's beautiful.
Except
Life
that
is
he's
so
talking about his wife.
I know.
I'm sorry.
Just
let
the
you go
lineup.
on.
Sorry, I don't know why that was so funny.
Again, hate highlighting. Hate
Okay,
Take
highlighting.
my wife, please.
I
Yeah,
forgot.
okay.
I
Wait,
forgot.
we need to
we'll
get
go
you a
back
red highlighter for this, or
Okay. I will let you go on with your quotes. I apologize.
Okay. Life is so damn hard. So damn hard. It just hurts people until finally it hurts them so that they cannot be hurt anymore. And that's the last and worst thing it does. Life plays the same lovely and agonizing joke on all of us. Very few people who accentuate the futility of life remark the futility of themselves. Perhaps they think that in proclaiming the evil of living, they somehow salvage their own worth for the ruin, but they don't, even you and I. The fire blazing in her dark and injured heart seemed to glow around her like a flame. Out of context,
A good collection, though.
those quotes were like all just really spoke to me.
Can I toss a short one in there because it kind of
Yeah.
goes along with that theme and maybe less so with anything I'm going to say? Happiness, remarked Maury Noble one day, is only the first hour after the alleviation of some especially intense misery. I think that's right along with all
that's
that
philosophy.
other...
That is philosophy. I mean, I'll give him that.
And so like, yeah, I was reading this book and I was just like annoyed and stuff. But I was just like, oh, that's a great line. Like, you know, and again, like maybe it's that thing that I think I had mentioned after Michaela's section about how I can take that step back and I'm like, oh, I'm reading this thing and I'm like seeing some value in it, right? I'm seeing something in it that's like, well, that was really interesting, right? And maybe like holding on to those quotes, but I'm never going to read this book again.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a good quality, though. I think that's an excellent quality. Your ability to critically think. Like, I could not see past my own hate. So I applaud you for thinking the same way about it as me, but being able to see the good things.
Right. So I'm going to make hate highlighting a thing. Definitely. So so I think F. Scott Fitzgerald was a thoughtful man for his time. I think he was observing what he saw and critiquing it. I do believe that the book is unreadable in 2022, like with the 2022 eyes on it. Yeah, like I am seeing a value in kind of what he's observing. And I maybe this is a choice I made not to get so angry about it. I chose to believe that, this was a cautionary tale. And I think he was saying, look at this. It's not to be admired. Like, this is not, I'm not presenting these people to you as like, this is a pedestal of greatness. I'm showing you these people to show you how not to be, how badly things can go. Yeah.
I agree with you, but it's also amazing that with that degree of introspection, it turned out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy for him. Right? He died at 44 of a heart attack, right? I mean, everything fell apart because of his drinking.
Yeah,
and so, I absolutely agree with you that he wrote it as a cautionary tale. But I do think it's interesting that with as aware of that as he clearly was, he still couldn't prevent himself from going down that path.
Yeah,
Ted,
that is really interesting.
Ted much?
Yeah. So I think this is a very strong, very maybe kind of obvious and very strong note to Jamie, that he needed to halt the path he was on when he was given the book. And so like, again, I don't believe that the characters were presented in a way that they were supposed to be admired. And I think he was trying to put a spotlight on these dangers, whether or not he was ignoring them himself. And that was a lesson that Jamie needed. We know that if Jamie eventually got there on his own, and I do not believe he would have read this book. I think he would have, I could see him like, for one thing, he like the fact that he threw away the book was everything Jamie at the time, right? And he would have read one page of that and been like
using it as a doorstop, maybe,
right? But he did need that warning. Like, I'm not defending the book. I think it was a product of its time, and like I was saying, like it needs a healthy amount of editing, and I do feel like books should be I do feel like books need to be defended. I do believe that Anne Rand's book needs to exist, and I'm not going to say like we should ban it.
How else can we mock it?
Yeah. Right. Like, but like, okay, but let's discuss it and let's talk about the problems, right? Like Ender's Game, another book, like some of that racism and stuff in there, like, okay, that's horrible. And like, so like, let's make a point of it. But like, hey, here's a story and this is the value of the story. And like this language here is garbage and you should never talk about someone in this way, really. Like maybe it's like maybe old books have like a big sticker on them being like,
yikes.
Yeah. A yikes sticker. Yeah.
Yikes sticker. Yikes. Oh, and then I just kind of made a point, like it just kind of reminds me a little bit of Star Trek. The original series is kind of trash. Like it's a lot of misogyny. It's like again, unwatchable in 2022. But at the time, it was the most diverse show on TV at its time, right? Like,
okay, I'm back. You nearly lost me with the Star Trek, but I'm back. I agree.
you're following me. It was the most diverse single show at its time of cast and what they were showing, and they did have women in some elevated positions on the ship and stuff like that. And so it just kind of has that same like, okay, I love Star Trek. I can't watch the original series anymore, but can I at least think of it in a way it's like, okay, but what did it do? Right? It started this series. And that's kind of how I look at books like this. Like they did something. Okay, enough defending. That was my
Someone had to do it.
I was like, how very dare you compare this to Star Trek? And then you brought it back, and I'm fine now.
Yes, yeah, it was no. Star Trek's way better than that. Okay, so I kind of went about a little bit of a rabbit hole here. So bear with me. Join me on
These
my
are my
rabbit
favorite
hole.
things. I love rabbit holes.
We'll come back out of it.
I love them so much. Oh, well, and then I'll dive down another one. It's going to be a rabbit hole kind of afternoon.
So I need to take a step back and tell you about another book I just read called The Turnout by Megan Abbott. Really good book, but it was very dark. And it was about a ballet school in England and this family that was running it and kind of everything that was going on. And it was very much like, what was that? Black Swan
Swan.
movie, you know, like with the
Natalie
evil
Portman,
girls. Yeah. Natalie Portman. Like the evil, like the girls like putting, you know, razor blades in each other's shoes when one of them got the part, like just evil. The book really detailed a lot of the like physical and emotional rigor of like performing at a level like that, right? And these were kids too. These were like kids performing a Nutcracker at this ballet school, but like the level of like perfection on these girls about, you know, like they weren't eating, but they were also trying to perform at this high level, and they were practicing all the time, and it was gross. And it kind of made me start thinking about the things that we value and the things that we are okay with because they give us something else. What I mean by that is like, so all performers, music, acting, sports, I think is kind of, where I'm relating it here with Ted Lasso very clearly, is that there's an element of being a high performer in areas like that involves some narcissism, and it also involves some level of pushing yourself beyond levels, right? Like whether it's like a spark of a talent appears in a child and decisions are made at that point. Like a parent is going to be like, we're going to put, I'm going to put you in these things, and you're going to go to, you're going to go to all these after school things, and you're going to excel at this, and you're going to, and if you fail, like I think Jamie's dad, right? Very much at that level of father. Then there's the kids who just like, if I fail, like I'm nothing. And there's a ton of pressure and stuff put on people, emotionally and physically. Right. And there was definitely that thing in ballet. Like, I mean, they're destroying their bodies by being ballerinas. They're destroying their bodies every day. Like their feet just become like, like
I think
so
that's the thing with ballet is people would say it's a sort of form of entertainment, but to me, ballet dancers are athletes. Like I fully believe that footballers wouldn't last 2 minutes doing what ballet dancers do. They wouldn't. No. There's just like the actual physicality of it.
In the US, a lot of college American football players will take dance classes to keep
work
up
on their footwork and balance.
Yeah.
Okay, that turns me on a little bit. That would get me. I would enjoy that. I love seeing people you don't expect people to be doing it, so that I would enjoy seeing that.
Roy Kent, ballet dancer.
Yoga. Hey,
does the yoga. Mm-hmm. Opens his hips. Want to see him in child's pose.
Get out of here.
We are consumers of all of this though too, right? We do, and I don't mean we, collective we as humans, I'm not speaking of all of us in the room here. But we all turn a blind eye to this. We value their craft, and we pay for things, concerts. We pay for concerts. We pay for shows, games, events. We're constantly throwing money at them. The way that we treat like the whole, in America, we have our NCAA, the college level athletes, and like we basically don't pay them and make them do all kinds of things.
Now we have NIL, and I like that.
Yes, it's has gotten better, but like. It's definitely has been a thing for a long time, and I feel like we are trying to improve. No, Yeah, like I feel like we're trying to improve a lot. And even American football was another thing I brought up, just like, the concussions and the things, like we have created so many more rules and regulations around trying to keep that from happening. But at the same time, I thought very vividly about a friend of mine, considering American football. She had someone in her family that was like playing football for a long time, and he ended up, having a concussion so bad he like has never been able to play the game again. And some of the, right, like on ESPN, they do a lot of those 30 by 30 shows where they highlight different athletes and different things. And there have been some stories I've seen that are just like mind blowing, the things that we've let go by for this.
By the way, I should go back a second because Michaela, you probably, when I said NIL, do you know what that is that college athletes have now? Okay, so for the longest time, college athletes were not allowed to profit at all off of anything regarding their involvement in college athletics. And the idea was to keep the playing field fair so donors to one school couldn't just keep things there. But then there's all these video games and stuff that come in and they end up making money off of the players. So NIL is name, image, likeness. And so now players are allowed to make money off of their own name, image, and likeness when it's used in
bloody
something.
Time. I mean, we were literally just talking about the workhouses.
Yes. Yep, that's exactly right.
We very willingly all ignore all of this, and we again attend all these performances and stuff, and we pay money and we idolize people who are athletes who are pushing their bodies and doing all this stuff. As long as we all want it, as we're going to keep paying for it, they're going to keep doing it, right? Like we're not going to help fix this problem as long as we're all supporting it. And so going back to the ballet for a second, I mean, it was almost kind of stunting these girls and boys, both of them. They're almost stunting their bodies and everything they do, but just to have these nutcracker performances that we all go to every year. Like, I don't know how many times I've been invited to a nutcracker performance every damn Christmas. And I'm like, I've seen it too many, it's not a great story, but these things are, and like, it's just thing about taking girls to their nutcracker show. And it's supposed to be, like a rite of passage for a lot of girls. And it's kind of ugly. We value the entertainment and we value our enjoyment of these things over everything. It's easy for us not to think or not even be aware of what it takes sometimes to do some of these things. I mean, even musicians, like I worked briefly in the music industry in the earlier part of my life. And I saw the thing where people, like, you rolled into town, a band rolls into any city, and everyone, they expect those musicians to be at peak performance. And they're like, I don't care I don't care that you've been playing 6 shows, and you have to take drugs even to get up and get on stage because you're so exhausted, like, right. And we don't care. No, you're here to entertain me. I've paid my money and my ticket, and get up on stage and you better play all the hits that I want. And you better be entertaining or I'm going to complain and talk shit about you. And so we see these people as owing us something. Again, it's like this entertainment. It's and I believe that this is something that Ted Lasso is trying to change, right? Like, he wants to make these people come in every day with their team because they love this sport and they want to be there, and these people are their friends and it's a team and they're getting more out of it versus, like, I think Jamie's dad is more about, like, you need to be the star, you need to you need to perform, you need to do everything to get us more money. Like, it's greed. We as a society value wealth and excess and drama over anything. We actually don't care about these people and we expect them to entertain us. And I feel like some of the things that we look at upon the wealthy, it falls under that same category, right? So Beautiful and the Damned portrayed people who had privilege. These are people, they didn't have to give anything for society. They could judge, they could live however they wanted. And in a lot of ways, people like that are idolized, right? Like, I even think about some of our MTV Cribs or what other show, even like all the reality TV of today, right? Like, what have the Kardashians given society other than having money? But how many people? Yes. But and what do? They have show season after season after season and millions upon millions of viewers, right?
We don't view things ethically. So like, we don't, or at least we haven't really up to this point. I think, things have changed with the pandemic and then George Floyd's murder in 2020 as well. I think a lot more people who weren't socially aware are now. But yeah, I mean, not like we were just saying earlier about was it the NIL you said, where they can actually make money from like college football?
Yeah.
Before that they couldn't. And we'd literally just said about the workhouses, and we're 100 years on and people are still profiting from other people's work. And that's what, so I'm turning this into an eat the rich, but do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, because not only did these people not have to give to society, but often they took, you know, more than they were like, that's just how I think how I couldn't get past it. But this has really opened my eyes.
Yeah, like so there is a lot of tendency for us to kind of look at people like this and maybe kind of feel like we're supposed to be worshiping them, or we're supposed to be, this is the way to really live, and all of this. And kind of to bring it back to Jamie. Here we're going back, we're coming out of the rabbit hole back to Jamie. You know, Jamie is a product of this society. He had a talent, and people, you know, and people with money wanted it. People with money wanted him. Same with, you know, Roy's even little story about, you know, when he was a little kid and just driven away from his family to be on a, you know, to be on a team and do all this. And it was like, we don't care. Like, you know, we as society don't care that about that story. Well, because now Roy Kent's, you know, winning games for us and winning titles for us. And so he's our, you know, we're cheering, and we're going to pay our money, have the, you know, shirt with his name on it, but we don't care about what happened to him. You know, I think he had a father that valued his talent for the glory and what it's going to give his family name over anything that was happening to him. It was about the money it could earn him. And he entered a sport where the fans only value him scoring. And again, I do believe Ted's trying to change this. I think he's trying to bring back the value of the love of the sport, the team, the value more than money and the fame. And I believe he gave this book to Jamie as that warning, maybe a little, maybe a little heavy-handed. But I think that Jamie's choices in season 2 actually start sending him on a similar path than Patch. Right? Like he was making decisions that weren't about his love of the sport anymore, but about his brand. Right. Like, and even Keely, you know, I mean, even Keely was kind of, you know, pushing him a little bit. And I love Keely, but like, she was even like, your brand, what are we going to do about increasing your brand? And like all of this. And it's like, that's what we value. And that is what we encourage. And again, that's, I think, unfortunately, this book, as ugly as it is actually like the conclusion of this. But this is what we've created again, because right, like I look at these people in this book and I look at the Kardashians and I'm like, what's the difference, right? The Hiltons, the Paris Hilton, like, you know.
Well, and even Keely in the show, she is that person. She's an influencer. She's famous for being kind of famous, or whatever it is she says. She is also a product of this culture. And I think that's probably what brings her and Jamie together in the first place. Like, she may be pushing Jamie within that, but she is also a victim of that same culture of like, you're pretty, sell your beauty. Like that's your physical beauty. And she isn't
Rebecca.
And right, until she breaks with Jamie, she befriends Rebecca, and she, you know, gets to know Roy a little bit more. She realizes, or she's able to see the worth that she already had that maybe she didn't recognize before.
So I was just going to say, I think one of the interesting things about this novel is, outside of the people in it, like Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald, they were the media stars of their generation, right? And they had this very self-aware, self-constructed image that they built and deliberately promoted to put themselves in this position. I mean, I'd argue versus reality stars today, like the Fitzgeralds had talent, right? But
I was gonna ask that. I was like, so are you saying their books are like the Kardashians' books? Or?
No, because
they wrote them.
I the Fitzgeralds very much, and to some extent later in their short lives, right, they became victims of that own sort of self-constructed celebrity, but that is very much the role they played in the jazz age. Scott Fitzgerald was the voice of his generation.
It's easier for these people to pull the wool over our eyes then. With social media now, we really get to see behind the curtain and see what these people are actually all about. And some of them have really like slipped up, and like to the point where you're like, you thought that was okay to say on social media. So I feel like the more we know, the more we can stop idolizing people who don't deserve it. But there are some people who just will anyway.
Agree, but I can't think of a lot of reality stars today that could put a sentence together the way F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Oh, absolutely not. No, I agree with that. I just mean,
is
like,
that a
general.
bad thing? I don't want sentences like his sentences. Yeah. I'm sorry.
I like his sentences.
He makes me turn.
Laugh. I will take my turn. I'm going to be so happy.
So
Everyone needs to turn into the video for that part because you're going to see all the rest of us with our eyes rolling back into our. I'm just teasing Marita.
My last little part was actually just another kind of left turn. But when we were reading Ender's Game, I believed that Sam's book was to tell him something about Jamie. And I believe that this is actually, again, something for Jamie to lean on Sam a little more. I feel like there's something about the juxtaposition of Sam and Jamie and all the differences in their life, right? Like Sam, he has everything Jamie is without the ego, not saying that he doesn't have some ego, but like there's less.
He has professional ego, I think.
Yes.
Whereas Jamie just has ego.
And Sam has loving, supportive parents that encourage him, with love versus greed. Like his parents they want him to be right. They want him to be in a good team. They're happy he's on a team with Ted. And that's what's important to them, not the fact that he's making this money. Sam is playing the sport because he loved it. And once he found this coach that supported him, he's like, I'm going to stay there. And he started excelling, right? Like, I think he's starting to get to like, right. Like when we have the one episode where they're like chanting Sam's name, like he's starting to get, he's starting to get up there, be a valuable player like Jamie. And then, Sam not taking the opportunity to be the Jamie of that team in Africa, right? Like he had an opportunity. He could have very easily gone, made a lot of money, but he decided to stay, right? And I thought that, that interesting kind of twist of him opening that restaurant was just, he stayed here to finish what he started, which is also comparison with Nate, sidebar, but like, right, Nate also like went for the glory. And, Sam is who you can be with fame, talent, and money and not be the beautiful and damned.
Yes.
Right? Yes. Sam is that. And so my last little joke that I wrote was that Sam and Jamie need to learn more from each other, and that I might just start shipping them. I might start a Sam and Jamie ship here. This might be the beginning.
Cute. That's so cute.
What do we call that ship?
Jam.
Jam.
Party sauna.
Jam.
Party
Sam
sauna.
Tartt. I don't know.
Sam Tartt. Jam.
Jam.
I think Jam was the best.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I genuinely enjoy it. Like, even though I started this off being so like really fucking angry, I really enjoyed that. And yeah, I think there's certain parts of it where you might have changed my mind a little bit. Just a little bit.
Don't go back and read it or anything, but
I'm not fucking reading it.
Let's see if Marita can drive it home though and make us actually like this book. I don't know if we'll get there.
So I want to make a distinction here because we're talking about like Goodreads ratings and how many stars we give this book, and I think it actually kind of bothers me that we don't have multiple sort of rating levels, because like, do I like anyone in this book? I do not. And do I think they're self-destructive in interesting ways? And that's an interesting point, because relative to all of the art we've seen since then, no. But do I think that for its time and in its context, it was brilliant? I absolutely do. And I also think there's a few relevant things here that we sort of should dive into. So I'll start off, and I talked about this a little bit because we talked quickly about how the Fitzgeralds were very much sort of building their own celebrity, and also how, as introspective as Fitzgerald was in terms of how he portrays this in his books, he still wasn't able to save himself from that same thing. But there's several spots in the book where it's even self-referential, right? Like a couple of quotes that I'll pull out. Like at one point, Dick Caramel, which I'm sorry, I'm 12, is the funniest name in the book. Snickered every time I saw it. He actually at one point is quoted as saying, well, these new novels make me tired. My God, everywhere I go, some silly girl asks me if I've read This Side of Paradise. Are girls really like that? If that's true to life, which I don't believe, the next generation is going to the dogs, right? This Side of Paradise was Fitzgerald's previous book, right? He's like making fun of people making fun of him. And then there's somewhere else where someone says, well, I hear all the new novels are sold to the moving pictures as soon as they come out, which is funny because Fitzgerald was very much a movie guy, right? So
and wasn't this book turned into a movie like within a year, right?
Yeah, so the novel was serialized through 1921, parts of it, right? It was released as a novel in March of 22, and then it came out as a film in January of 23, right? So the turnaround on that is amazing. There's a very self-awareness, amount of self-awareness there. And then there's one line that isn't actually talking about people, so the quote is, August is still proclaimed relentlessly by 1,000 crickets around the side porch, and by one who has broken broken into the house and concealed himself confidently behind a bookcase, from time to time shrieking of his cleverness and indomitable will. He's talking about all this loudness of Craig's. I love that line, by the way, right? But there's one that's gotten in the house and it's just making all this noise about how fucking brilliant it is, right? But it's not. It's an asshole, right? It didn't get there through any cleverness. It's just they're making noise, and that's so much the people in the world Fitzgerald is writing about. You know, born on third base, thinking they hit a triple, is exactly who these people are, and they think they're so fucking clever, but it's not by any of their own means that they've gotten where they are. I think Fitzgerald was self-aware enough that that's the sort of thing he cooked into his novel. So for a little bit of cultural context, I'm gonna, in the next wee little bit, talk a lot about and really just pull from a professor at Troy University. His name is Kurt Kerna, and he is a big Fitzgerald guy. He's the executive director of the F. Scott Fitzgerald Society, and he's written a lot about Fitzgerald, but specifically I've found a lot of his stuff on the cultural context in which Fitzgerald was writing. A big point he brings up about why Fitzgerald wrote the way he did and why he was so important is, so we come out of the 1890s and we start to see, right, this book was the early 20s, this huge shift in how youth was viewed, right? And so for the longest time, society had this view of children as young adults. Kernet refers to them as apprentice adults, where everything is just this sort of progression from children getting wisdom and growing into adulthood. But there are all these societal changes that started happening around this time, right? So we have compulsory schooling, we have child labor laws, and we start having things like social groups where people are really cohorted into groups, you know, like the YMCA or maybe the Boy Scouts, where youth is together in age cohorts, which hadn't really been seen at that scale before, at least not in the US. Okay, so we have this shift in society in that manner where we start having youth coming together as more of a cohesive group. And so then in 1904, there's this huge study. And, you know, normally when I say a study, I think of a scientific one, and we have scientific papers that are, you know, 3 to 10 pages or something. This is like a 600-page book. I found it online and wanted nothing to do with it. But it's this by a psychologist named G. Stanley Hall. And he was a really big deal in psychology, like a really big name. He was also hugely problematic. He was a eugenicist. He had all these horrible racial ideas, but he had this hugely influential work on adolescence that basically took this idea of adolescence as its own distinct developmental period. So he characterized it as a time of storm and stress, which is very much what we think of as adolescence now, right? I think the age limitations for adolescence were a little shifted in his work from what we think of, but it's still a general idea. And so Kernet characterizes this description of adolescence, and I'm going to quote Kernet here as, you know, saying it's the struggle between natural youth striving to retain primitive instincts and a civilized adult world excessively reticent in its passions and creativity. So we've got this age cohorting of kids or young adults, right? And all of a sudden we have this idea where we start to think that adolescence is this distinct stage where we're not just sort of smoothly transitioning. So in the jazz age, we have this first generation that's really grown up with that idea, right? They've really been raised in that, and they're cohorted, and so they have their own subculture. Like, and we see so much of this now, right, with the, you know, different generations talking about distinctions between generations, and it's very specific now, but that's really the first kind of time it happened. So they've got their own slang, they've got their own ideas, they've got their own stuff going on, and the adults are like freaking out about the morality of the whole thing. And so there's this great quote from the book that kind of encapsulates this. As so when they're out in the country looking for a house, and of course Gloria is a horrible driver because the book is not short on misogyny, I will grant anyone that, right? Gloria is this nightmare of a driver, and she's just crashed the car into a fire hydrant, and they're right by this real estate agent, which is why they end up in that town, like going to get the house, right? And so they ask this guy about it after just getting out of their car that's crashed. And the quote is, "The man nodded, unable to follow such a sally of spontaneity. There was something subtly immoral in doing anything without several months of consideration." And so that's this encapsulation of like adults kind of freaking out about this younger generation with this absolute impulsivity and that kind of behavior. With a lot of the writing that was done for or about adolescence that preceded Fitzgerald, the characters are kind of meant to be instructive. Like, you know, these are the moral lessons they learned, and this is how they got through life, right? Give a sense of how people should live. And then we get Fitzgerald, and kind of why he was so important is he wrote about youth from the point of view of how they see themselves, right? Instead of how adults wanted them to be or how adults wanted to see them. And so in doing this, and I'm going to quote Kernet again, he was reversing the values traditionally attached to youth and maturity by idealizing the former as a standard that adults invariably fail. Youth for Fitzgerald marked the apogee of one's romantic promise. Once that peak was reached, Aging exiled one into the cold, mundane world. In portraying age this way, Fitzgerald drew from a common pool of imagery that equated growing up with the biblical story of the fortunate fall, right? So I'm psyched with myself because I learned this term post-lapsarian, right? Which is after the fall, right? So now Fitzgerald's created this world instead of like, we're trying to get the wisdom of age. Well, no, we're trying to live our life while we can, because once we're through our youth, right, we've kind of missed our peak potential and it's all over, and like it's all downhill from it. And I think it's important to realize this in this context, because as you read the book, at least when I read it, he's writing about turning 30 like it's the end of the fucking world, right?
And as a bunch of women who have,
hilarious to me,
as a bunch of women who have done that a while ago.
Indeed.
Let's say
Just a while ago, not
Indeed.
that long.
just a while ago.
But you know, and like I
12
said,
years.
there's this self-fulfilling prophecy, because for Fitzgerald it was kind of very downhill for him. It was very important for him to like achieve early, but then he died of a heart attack at 44, right? He isn't just writing surely from that youth perspective, right? That quote we had earlier, he has that self-awareness and he has that understanding of the alienation that previous generations have to this. And so we also throw into this world the flapper, which wasn't just youth, but it was a response of women to this innate understanding that any freedom they have is linked to them being young, because as soon as they get married, they're stuck in a very traditional role. We have adults starting to have this more permissive understanding of adolescent behavior. And in reading about this time period, there's, in addition to Dick Caramel, a phrase that will never not make me laugh: the idea of petting parties. Petting parties is so funny.
I was like, what? When that happened?
Is that like petting's kissing, right? That's like snogging.
Sexual contact up to and including, I think, not actually having intercourse. So
Dry humping, right?
petting, you know, as one does.
Count on our Scott to say it like it is.
Lower the tone.
We appreciate you.
Right. And so we have adults starting to have this permissive understanding, but there's this conflict between like concerns about morality, but they were also worried about people marrying too young. But if they're not marrying young, then what are they doing? Right. So it's this weird time of social upheaval. And then we've got women who are like, well, why the fuck would I not have all the fun I can right now? Right. Because that's the period in which they're able to live their life, right? So the flapper came to like exemplify this romance of youth. And because obviously women in lower social classes would end up needing to work and have different kind of ideas about life, but for upper class women, really their only socially acceptable pastime when they're young is trying to find an appropriate husband. And so we end up with a situation where it's kind of got some ideals of feminism because they're trying to go out and live and be free, but it pits women against each other because it's all a giant fucking competition, right?
Yes, because there can only be one.
Yes. So anyway, so we have this youth movement that I think society is still to varying degrees recovering from, right? We're starting, especially as society ages, we're starting to appreciate older people now. But that's kind of where we're at, and that's where that age, you know, that obsession with youth really got started. We are in a world now where we have all of this age cohorting, and you see, you know, arguments about Twitter on what specific generation you're in, and it gets a little weird sometimes, right? But we do have this aging population, so people are, you know, like my life is so much better now than it was when I was 30, right? Like people understanding
Facts.
what you can accomplish as you age. And so, but there are some areas where it's not really true. There are some ages where 30 is the end of the fucking world. And one of them is sports, right? And there are some notable exceptions to athletes, right? But there is a lot in Ted Lasso that deals with aging. Roy's aging out of his career.
I forgot we were even talking about Ted Lasso for a minute. I was so engrossed in like your analysis of the story and the time period and all this. I was like, yeah. And then all of a sudden you were like, athletes. And I was like, whoa, yeah, Ted Lasso, of course. And then you were like, yeah, that's what we're talking about.
So I want to give a lot of credit to Professor Kernut for his analysis, because I did draw so much from that. But I do think there's a lot of Ted Lasso here, right? So we've got Roy aging out of his career. We've got Jamie who needs to grow the fuck up. Rebecca and Ted are both coping with divorce in middle age, and Rebecca has this additional issue of seeing her much older ex-husband having a child with a younger, effectively replacement for her. There's something that Fitzgerald used a lot of, and I was reading this going, holy crap, there's a lot of this in here, and there's a lot of imagery around color. And I'm not talking about skin tone, I'm talking specific color imagery that Fitzgerald uses. And The Great Gatsby is known for this, right?
The Green Lantern.
Right.
How
Yeah,
many
that
times
green
have I
light.
had a student talk about the green light and the green
Right.
light? And I'm like, oh my
Right.
God, the green light. Yeah, I get it.
Indeed. Okay. But there is a ton of use of color in Beautiful and Damned as well. And notably at the start of the novel, because when I was looking through, I started narrowly with Beautiful and Damned scholarship, and I just got broader and started looking at stuff about Fitzgerald. So there are people who've done really intelligent analysis of color use in Great Gatsby, and like really quantitative, which is amazing to me and really speaks to my nerd side, right? We're counting where different color references are used. I just did a quick run through because I am that flavor of nerd, right? And so you get the start of the novel, and you have all of these reds and oranges and yellows that are attached to descriptions that give you the sense of luxury, right? The red and yellow of the fire, there's an orange lamp that he really likes. There's all of these references in there like that, right? And then we get midway through, and we're in this transitional point where they find the country house. It's a gray colonial house that someone's put a red roof on, and there's very transitional split color imagery there. And so then as they fall into this awful sort of dissipation, God, all this use of gray and adjectives like hazy and milky and opalescent that don't show up at the beginning of the novel. And we do see bright colors, but whenever we see them, they're attached to somebody else, right? So at the very end of the book, when they're on the deck of the ship and they're gossiping about Anthony, they describe the woman as being the pretty girl in the yellow dress, right? All of a sudden, all these luxury, wonderful youth colors are attached to other people. And when he goes off into the army and he has this affair with the much younger Dot, what really catches his attention about her is her violet eyes, right? There's this just color and this brightness and this youth about. And so a couple quotes from the book. One of them is, "Youth has come into this room in palest blue and left it in the gray cerements of despair," right? So we start off with something that's very, very colorful and just fades off into gray because you turned fucking 30. All right.
Everything's gray then.
And so another quote is, "Because desire just cheats you. It's like a sunbeam skipping here and there about a room. It stops and gilds some inconsequential object, and we poor fools try to grasp it. But when we do, the sunbeam moves to something else, and you've got the inconsequential part, but the glitter that made you want it is gone." So this loss of color, and there's even, the word colorless is used multiple times towards the end of the book where things are like going on like that. Okay, so what does this have to do with Ted Lasso? There are really some specific things done with Ted Lasso, and there's some quick anecdotal things we can go through. Again, I know I'm a nerd. So I went through and I didn't watch the whole thing, but went through and started picking color patterns and color palettes. And it can be a little hard to spot because it's about a professional football team, right? And so much of it is going to be
You get a cookie. You get a
yay!
cookie.
Oh, now
or
we're
a
into a
biscuit.
reward and positive
You get a
reinforcement
biscuit
for
for
calling
that.
it football. Right. So much of it is just going to be around Richmond colors, right? And so it's hard to deal with the blues and golds and reds because so much of it is Richmond branded. Yeah. But, as one-offs, we have the scene where Rebecca first gets the biscuits and her top matches the pink of the biscuit box, right? We have that eggplant power suit that makes a few appearances. One that I really, really like, when we have the gala and Rupert appears, he's like the only one in a white tux. Right. So he acts like he's coming in to save the day, even though he's totally just being a piece of shit and he's like purely selfish. Right. So like later on in the Dart scene, what does Ted say he's doing when he talks to Rebecca?
White knighting.
Right? So it's the comparison of those two things, like, right, both men are showing effectively their true colors, right? But it's a difference between being who you want people to see you are and who you actually are in terms of, but there's another use of color. And of course we have the whole rainbow episode and the use of the song Rainbow, and you see Higgins' wife, and she's dressed in blue right as those lyrics come up. I noticed in rewatching Rainbow, because I did go through that one more slowly, there is a lot of use of green very conspicuously. Did y'all notice that?
Roy's inside jacket.
Yes, that's one of the ones I'm gonna, right, but
sorry.
So no, that's exactly one of the examples, and I'll talk about that specific one a little bit later. But like at the beginning of the episode, Higgins has the payroll folder and it's like right up on screen and it's green. And then Keeley has this bright green drink, the smoothie that they start with a close up on. And there's just all this green, it's Nade's parents' Jade anniversary. The woman at the restaurant is named Jade. There is so much green in that. And I don't know, like I didn't crack the code. I don't know if it's someone's wife's favorite color or what it is, but I'm curious to know people's thoughts. But I'm going to get off that and talk to something a little more relevant. But because color and the loss of it is used to depict aging so much in Beautiful and Damned, we can look at a couple of people in Ted Lasso and bring together the themes of color and how we show aging. And so if we start with Roy, right, because he's very much coded as the fading star, and his color palette
Dark heather charcoal.
Dark heather charcoal. And interestingly, if he has a cognate in Beautiful and Damned, right, competing for the woman, he's Blokman, right, whose name later gets changed to, for those of us who finished, it gets changes, his name changes to Black, right? And so the commitment to this color pattern or this palette is so strong. And this is such a dorky detail to notice, but in the locker room of Richmond, the towels are Richmond colors. You see like Will the Kitman handling the towels, they're red and they're gold and they're blue. But in the second episode of season 1, in the Biscuits episode, Roy is wrapped up in a towel. And I love that detail so much. They're not putting him in a colorful towel. He is staying in that monochrome black.
I can't imagine Roy wrapped in a yellow towel. Like, that's just too funny to me.
Cute. The players as well in Rainbow, the opposite team is grey. I noticed that
Yes,
as Roy just
yes,
walks in, grey sock, grey
they
bottoms, grey top, like so.
Yeah.
Oh, your mind! I just love it.
And so Roy is in black so much of the time, but right then when we have the game at Everton, and we get this flash of brilliance from him, right? He's old and he's slow, but we get that flash of it. And the team is in their third kit. And I know you all aren't sports fans. Do you know what third kit is? It's the orange one. It is the bright orange one. So third kit is when your regular colors clash too much. And I don't mean clash in a don't look good together. I mean, oh, you did. Oh, I'm excited.
Yeah, because I was like, why are they? I've seen their away strip and I've seen their home strip. Why are they not wearing either of them? And he explained it to me. Oh, I say when I say I know things, my husband explained it to me.
That's okay. That's how we learn.
You still know them, right? So right. So in saying clash, I mean when they're not distinguishable enough from the other team's colors, right? We have this, and it's usually some highlighter color, bright yellow, bright orange, something like that. But when we have this flash of brilliance from Roy, it is in that bright orange jersey. And then we do get, when he starts coaching, we kind of go back to black because the tracksuits everyone else wears, right? Everyone's wearing their coaching tracksuits, but Roy gets this black, might be very, very dark navy, but it reads as darker than the other ones. It's this black t-shirt that has red details. It's like a ringer. And we see Beard wear it a little bit later on too. But if you see him coaching like that, wearing that shirt, his outfit just reads a little bit darker than the rest of the coaches, which makes me laugh. It's a real commitment to like Roy's whole mystique. I tracked all his suits all the way through. There's a couple times where he's wearing, because his suits even have black shirts, right? So there's once where he has a dark burgundy tie. The Christmas episode, he splashes out and his tie is navy with like gold dots.
And he has that little pom-pom.
Yes, and he gets that little pom-pom. That's right. But most of the time, with the exception of the Rainbow episode where he's running and we get that splash of green, where we could argue where he's kind of indulging in something more youthful because he's running, right? There is only one time where he is wearing a shirt that is not predominantly black. Anyone want to guess?
When he's not wearing one in the wheelie bin. I know that's wrong.
No. So
I love it.
So at the end of Goodbye Earl, when he's with the yoga ladies, he has a red, and I love this because if I had to order the color, I would search for a heathered red t-shirt. He has this red shirt with like Asian style golden dragons on it, and he is the youngest person there, right? And all the yoga ladies are in bright colors too, but that is the only colored shirt that he wears, right? So it's this amazing coding of color coming away from him but splashing in when he is youthful in his situation, which I love. And I'm not saying this is a specific thing or a shout out to Fitzgerald. It's a costuming choice though, and I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So meanwhile,
the intentionality behind these color choices and all
right. So, and then meanwhile we have Jamie, right? And he's impetuous, and there's definitely, like in the first season, there's black and white in his outfits, but there's also icon, right? There's also these flashy colors. I mean, he just reads as so immature. And even like if you compare Roy's chant, right? It's got swearing in it, to Jamie's, which is a fucking kid's song, right? You can make that distinction in age there too.
I wonder what this says about Isaac, because his outfits are
his
brilliantly colorful, like so colorful.
They're always very flamboyant. But like with Jamie, so in the first season, right, he has some black and white stuff, but he's got more than one brightly colored floral tracksuits, right? They're like so over the top.
I want
And
one.
I think they're Gucci. You'd have to drop a pretty penny.
Adidas has some that are that might, maybe not those, but Adidas has some floral tracksuits. So but his gala outfit isn't like a normal blue suit, right? It's a pretty bright blue suit, which he wears with a
Nipple.
shirt.
bright, well, no shirt, right? But a bright orange pocket square too.
And he has tomato soup as well, which is orange, and spills it on his nips.
Right. So everything there is bright. And then we see him on Lust Island, and and of course it's Lust Island, right? But he's in this bright orange floral shirt and bright orange trunks, and he's all bright colors. But the minute he's out of there, he's in black, right? When he's meeting with his agent, his color palette just instantly subdues, and it stays that way for the duration of the season. So he still has styles that read really young, like the way things are cut and the way outfits are put together read really young, but the color is mostly drained out of it, right? He has a camo jacket, but it's really subdued. It's not bright green. It's like almost earth tones.
Yeah.
And so something that's really interesting is when in the signal, when he confronts Roy about not coaching him, Jamie is in this dark heather charcoal jacket. He's in this very dark, subdued outfit. And because Roy is still in his coaching gear that has that red detail, right? When Jamie is being the mature one, there is more color in Roy's outfit.
I thought the Iron Giant blew my mind, and I thought, this is phenomenal.
But, and so like, even like at the funeral, because everybody's in black for the funeral, but players still have some pretty flamboyant suits, right? Isaac's suit for the funeral is still, but Jamie's like dressed like a grown-ass man, right? He is dressed like an adult.
He even tells them what shoes to get.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So the one big exception to Jamie's color palette after he's sort of come back as a mature player is he has this bright red vest. He's wearing it at some point in rainbow, not for any specific scene, but it's also what he wears when he goes to apologize to Roy for saying to Keeley that he's still in love with her. And so this is a situation where we have Roy being the adult in the situation where Jamie's trying to be mature, and so we have that color palette reversed again. And I love that. And so there's another really notable example with color in the show, and that's Nate. And the reason Nate's relevant here is because he's talked about how he's terrified of aging, right? He says he doesn't like baths because he doesn't like ending up all wrinkly. But at the same time, he absolutely bristles when anyone uses youthful language to refer to him because he treats it like it's diminishing him, right? When Colin calls him boyo, he just absolutely, right, cannot stand it. And so...
Which is weird because Welsh people call everyone boyo.
Right, but you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
He does not like that kid kind of reference. Nate's outfit the whole first season, with the exception of the suit for the gala, right, is the same. And so it's not unusual for people within like a sports organization. There's kind of one pattern that the coaches and higher ups might wear and something else that somewhere else on the staff might wear. But so Nate's whole first season, he has this quarter zip tracksuit top, and it's the Richmond colors, but the abdomen, the torso part is bright red. And so you were talking about Star Trek, Andrea, sorry, it makes me think of like the red shirts in Star Trek, right? Because all of the people kind of lower down in the organization have that red torso. When he gets promoted to coach, he immediately switches to what everyone else has, which is all the other coaches have this full zip that has turquoise on the torso. So this is immediate color change for Nate. But then for the games, he starts wearing the suit, right? And the suit, at first, he's got like a burgundy shirt with a burgundy tie. He'll do some colorful ties, but he gradually moves on and gets darker and darker and darker in terms of the ties that he wears. And then right near the end, when he goes clothes shopping with Keeley, he tries on a suit in not just Richmond colors, but really, I mean, you could have a suit that's blue with maybe a gold shirt and a red tie that's not flamboyant, but this is like a plaid. It's like, it's loud. It screams, right?
I love it. I love it so much because it's so out there. Yeah. Because it's so over the top. It's like so bad it's good.
It's not confident enough to pull it off, though.
No,
do you know what I mean? He's not at that stage. There's people who probably wear it and
knows
be like, hot, but you got to feel it.
Right, and he knows that, but at the same time, he rejects the suit, and it's a rejection of not only this Richmond identity, but also he rejects it in favor of an all black suit, right? So if we have this color coding of color being youth, and then losing that color as we age. He's rejecting that in terms of, I mean, the evil path he's going on. And of course, there's a whole lot of Star Wars imagery with everything getting like dark here too. And I'm not trying to discount that, but I'm trying to stay a little bit on topic, right? So he gets this fully black suit, which is what he wears when he goes full on evil. So he has drained the color out of his own life. And at the same time, we've got that color change in his hair where he's gone from dark hair to completely silver. I don't think any of that is a specific shout out to Fitzgerald, but it is consistent. I'm really interesting to see if they stick with that or what they do, because I think everything in the show is intentional, but I don't want to argue intent, because intent has a right answer. Instead of looking and being like, hey, I saw this thing and this was awesome, right? I just like going, well, that looks like sense. It looks like this is
nothing.
happening.
Once you explain it to me, it doesn't feel like nothing. Do you know what I mean? It feels
and like the book, I think Fitzgerald, to your point, like he uses the color very clearly as symbolism as well. And so like, yes, the fact that like there's so many things in Ted Lasso that feel so intentional. So like when you hear about something that people say was like a throwaway comment, like the Fountainhead comment, and it like, I refuse to believe that, because nothing is throwaway, right? Like all of this symbolism about color and how important that is, like that all takes so much thought.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And like the thought that he like says something sometimes, I don't know, like not that he can never say anything that's just off the cuff, but like, I don't believe it.
The thing for me with Roy's suit with the green insert is that's a choice, because when you're working with green screen, you try to avoid that color.
Right. Oh no, that
was a choice.
I firmly believe that all of that green and rainbow is intentional. I just don't know what it.
I thought for Roy it was
what does it mean
type thing.
And for Roy it might, but there's just so much green in there, and
yeah.
You know, that might be worth talking about. There's one other thing I kind of wanted to bring up that's totally off base here, but because we've sort of called out the misogyny in this book, and boy is there a lot of it. Every woman is fat or ugly or boring. But there are some points in there where Fitzgerald has what are really kind of enlightened for his time phrasings in there. Anthony says, "You like men better, don't you?" And she says, "Oh, much better. I've got a man's mind." And he says, "No, you've got a mind like mine, not strongly gendered either way." And this idea that people could like let go of gender that way, I thought was kind of interesting. And I also thought it was interesting at some point later in the book, Gloria says, "It's funny, but I'm so sure that those kisses left no mark on me, no taint of promiscuity. I mean, even though a man once told me in all seriousness that he hated to think I'd been a public drinking glass," which by the way is like the most ridiculous insult.
For those just listening, Michaela just left. She's done. She's gone to the Crown and Anchor. P.S. Eat the rich.
Okay, but then her response to him was, I just laughed and told him to think of me rather as a loving cup that goes from hand to hand, but should be valued nonetheless. I mean, the passing around imagery is bad, right? But it reminded me of the conversation that they had when Keeley had just slept with Jamie, and Ted is calling Roy out for being upset that Keeley had her own history, not unlike that of Roy's, right?
Mm-hmm.
This idea that, you know, women don't get used up. it's
and
not
they're
a
not
finite
objects.
quantity.
You know,
right.
They're not yours to possess.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, no, I understand your issue with the cup imagery, right?
No, but even with Gloria's answer, well, she's still sort of in that cup analogy thing. She's is trying to take ownership over that objectification. Like she
still sounds like a
that.
pick me as well, though. Like I'm not like other girls. I don't like that.
No, and I do very much think there's a distinction between how women are pitted against each other in the novel versus how women are able to not do that in Ted Lasso. And I really appreciate that.
It's because when men write women, that's what they think we're like.
They think we're all fighting over them. I mean, we don't give a shit. We want to have fun.
But I do think there has been an active movement of women uplifting other women that has in this century particularly really evolved quite a bit, because we're trying to get past the idea that there is only one role for a woman. Like only one woman can be this boss. Only one woman can be like get this thing. Like
right.
We're in an era in humanity, in society, where we are saying, like we don't need to compete, but I think a lot of men who still write about women keep that mentality that we're like catty and
Most.
petty and fighting one another. So,
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, let's be honest. There are women, I'm sorry, who actively support the patriarchy.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean,
pick me's.
And yeah,
and part of whatever grace I'm affording Fitzgerald while I read this is with so much misogyny. I mean, not only was he a product of his time, but he wrote this when he was in his mid-20s. I had so much internalized misogyny in my mid-20s. Like,
Yes, same.
I mean,
Mhm.
it's
yeah.
amazing he got as
Yeah.
far as he did, even though he doesn't necessarily deserve to be congratulated for only getting that far, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
um, there's one point where he's talking to someone who went to some school called Buckley and talks about all the fancy stuff he learned, right? And Anthony, of course, is a Harvard snob, right? And so it says Anthony could not help wondering what possible fancy stuff he'd learned at Buckley in 1911. An irrepressible idea that it was some sort of needlework recurred to him throughout the rest of the conversation, and just how much of an Ivy League shit he is, and how
Wow.
catty
Goodbye.
that was.
Wow.
I was like, oh, I have been on a date with that guy.
As a public school advocate, someone who attended public schools from K through PhD and teaches in a public university, fuck off with that.
Yeah, big
But I
time.
mean,
Fuck right off.
that's the purpose. Like you said at the beginning, that is his intention, is for it to call out that mentality. And I get that. It's just, it's so frustrating when you get to the end of the novel and there is no lesson learned. There is no growing up that takes
Mhm.
place. There's just break. You just break. And
Mhm.
and you know what? I don't know, maybe this will catch us some slack, but it kind of reminds me of young Stan Twitter people who are saying like, oh, like if you're above the age of X, and
Yeah, you
there's
can't be
different
part of
ages for different
fandom.
people, like you shouldn't be in fandom. You should be doing responsible things. You should be like
Right.
feeding your kids and going to work. And I'm like, but we're not allowed to have fun. Like, wait till you get to this age. Like,
Fuck off.
So and something I actually forgot to bring up while I was talking about Jamie is we actually see him start to appreciate older people considerably more as we go through, particularly like when
Yes.
They're
May
tall
tells the pub
Yodas.
lads, yeah, they're tall. Oh, people are so wise. They're tall Yodas.
hopefully
I was
she
just gonna
gets it
say,
reset.
Marita, what you were just saying was making me think a lot about like
Again, another time, amazing like approaches that we all took, as Andrea mentioned. Like, we all come at this from something different, and I love when our minds come together. But Michaela, I know you had something you wanted to wrap us up with.
I do. I want to ask, from the movie Ted 2, there is a bit, if you've seen, you'll know, where F. Scott Fitzgerald is called Fuck Scott Fitzgerald, because that must be his name, because otherwise why else would he hide it? So my question for you ladies is, does he deserve the name Fuck Scott Fitzgerald? I think I know the answers to this, given what we've spoken about, but
You know what? Himself, no. His books, maybe. That's my opinion.
I can co-sign that. I don't think he deserves it. I think, again, like, yes, he could have always done better. He was a product of his time. You can always do better, but
Scott
yeah,
Fitzgerald, do better.
do better.
See, I'm not even willing to defend him as a person because I think it's kind of ambiguous whether or not he was a total fuckboy, right? And I think we won't really know.
yeah.
But I probably appreciated this book more than the rest of you.
So
I appreciated your take on it more than I appreciated the book, quite frankly, all of your takes. But yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair.
but much like Kerouac, I think he might be more quotable than readable.
Yeah, I had a lot of parallels I was drawing. I almost considered bringing in Kerouac to my discussion on alcohol because it was used very heavily there as well. But just for the sake of time, I left it out. But we got another book coming up next month. Andrea, what is our next book?
So our next book is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
And I'm looking forward to everyone enjoying that a whole bunch more than they did this book.
Yes.
Can't
A
wait.
palate
I
cleanser,
really-
if you will.
And
Yeah.
and I think we might be having a special guest join us for that episode. Is that
Oh,
Hoping.
yes.
Yes.
we're hoping. So
Yeah.
stay tuned and you might get a
Fingers
new
crossed.
perspective to listen to in our next episode. But
Yeah.
grab the book, physical copy, digital copy, audio book, cliff notes, whatever you want, however you can approach this book, and join in and give us your thoughts about how Bird by Bird connects with Ted Lasso.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Follow us on Twitter at Beards Book Club or send an email to us at coachbeardsbookclub@gmail.com.
Subscribe to us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts.
Share us with your friends and family, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review.
If you prefer the video version, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Coach Beards Book Club now.